Hello and welcome to Ellroy Reads. I am your host Stephen Powell, and before we begin today's episode, I just want to say that I am increasingly aghast at the amount of product placement there is on the internet these days. It really gets me upset. So what I usually do is just have a refreshing drink, followed by a relaxing read, and it makes everything better. Okay, if you're unfamiliar with Ellroy Reads, the gist of the show is that every week I look at a book that was highly influential to James Ellroy, a book that thrilled him, moved him, inspired him. And today's book is Portnoy's Complaint by Philip Roth. Okay, Philip Roth was a titan of American literature. He was born in Newark, New Jersey in 1933. And Newark would play a huge role in his literature. He's probably its most famous son. He was born to uh, second generation Jewish immigrant parents. Their heritage was from Austria and the Ukraine. He worked as an academic. He began publishing short stories. He was actually quite cynical about the role that academe or teaching creative writing could play in terms of producing young writers. But nevertheless, his reputation was starting to grow. He was getting novels published, and his fourth novel was in some ways he had success, but Portnoy's Complaint was in some ways his breakout work. It caused a storm of controversy, which only served to heighten Roth's celebrity, and he became very much the kind of critically respected, darling of American literature. This was a time when controversy was actually quite good for an artist in many ways. It's different now, and I'll get into that later. Okay, so the basic structure, if that's the word, of the book is that it is a monologue between Alexander Portnoy and his psychoanalyst, Dr. Spielvogel. And Portnoy is talking about just being a young Jewish man and his very priapic disposition. He's sexually obsessed. And the complaint, actually, there's a kind of a phony definition at the beginning of the novel, is about sexual longings in conflict with kind of ethical and altruistic uh, dispositions. And that comes from Dr. Spielvogel himself. So Portnoy describes to Spielvogel his excessive masturbation. And this is probably a book that is completely obsessed with onanism. And as he progresses past that, past the adolescent stage where he's just doing it all the time, and he actually begins sexual relationships or real romantic relationships, although this is not a romantic book, I have to say. uh, we get into all manner of usual sexual escapades, and they're usually very outlandish, very fanciful, very grotesque in some ways. For instance, he describes masturbating with the aid of a piece of liver, which his mother later serves as for family dinner. And all of this kind of sexual obsession is weighed down with a lot of Jewish angst, guilt. Um, Portnoy is, he displeases his father particularly because he's not going to settle down. He's not going to marry a nice Jewish girl and give them Jewish children. He's sexually obsessed with Gentile women, and a lot of it is just fantastically funny. It is coarse, vulgar, blackly humorous. Portnoy begins to go on adventures. There's talks about American Jews and their relationship with the old country, the homeland, Israel, and a lot of it is just brilliantly written. I found that, especially in light of some revelations regarding Philip Roth, a lot of it was actually difficult to read today. This came out in 1969, and like I say, times have changed. Toxic masculinity, although you'd hardly call Portnoy masculine, the fact that he's this kind of a weedy character, he's a schmiel, the kind of the Yiddish dialect in this is hilarious and used to great effect. But nevertheless, a lot of it reading today, I don't care what any other critic thinks. My reaction to it, and perhaps it'll be your reaction too, perhaps not, was just revulsion at parts. There's parts where the black humor just doesn't work, where it just gets disgusting. And to put it in context, prior to this novel, Roth's prose style had been kind of elegant and Jamesian. He was an admirer of Henry James, and with this one, he just let loose, and it seems like he found his voice. He'd had trouble writing it. He'd been through a divorce to a woman named Margaret Williams. They'd had a very, very tempestuous marriage. This kind of character is Roth because he was, a lady killer, but he was sexually obsessed. His wife had, duped him through a urine test into making him think she was pregnant. That he became obsessed with that betrayal as he saw it, and they had divorced, a rather ugly divorce. She was receiving a generous alimony settlement, and Roth had written a series of kind of short stories. He'd had one of them published under the title Whacking Off. And he saw that it would work very well as a kind of episodic stream of consciousness novel, but he was reluctant to write it because she'd get 50% of what he earned off it. Then she dies in a car crash, and he feels free to write it. His writer's block is suddenly lifted. He completes a novel at the Yaddo, which is a writer's retreat. And like I say, it's his breakout novel. And from that point forward, right until his death at the age of 85, he is, this literary celebrity darling. James Ellroy greatly admired Roth. Now, in one respect, you think they couldn't be more different. Roth is a Jewish writer, Ellroy's a Gentile writer. Ellroy's genre, crime. Roth is kind of high literature. But in many ways, that 1969, when this was published, James Ellroy, or Lee Earl Ellroy as he still his legal name, was Alexander Portnoy. In many respects, he was completely sexually obsessed, but hopeless with girls. His escapades when he had them were farcical, and you can read more about them either in Love Me First in Danger, my biography of Ellroy, or read Ellroy's second memoir, The Head Like a Curse, where he talks about this sexual obsession, where he talks about being a compulsive masturbator. And really, Portnoy's Complaint is a great novel to read if you want to understand the young Ellroy. Ellroy's admiration for Roth would persist, through the decades. He always said that, I want to have a strong third act. I'm in competition with Philip Roth. Philip Roth, in the last 20 years of his life or so, was producing incredible work like The Plot Against America and Sabbath Theatre. And there are not many authors who are producing such strong work at a late stage in their career. Ellroy was exceptionally proud that American Tabloid, one of his greatest novels, actually beat out, I don't want to have a play on words, actually defeated, shall we say, Sabbath Theatre, which was, Roth's novel for Time magazine, Novel of the Year. When he, as he put it, left Philip Roth in the shit, the thought that one of his novels would be above Philip Roth's as kind of Critics' Choice of the Year was a huge boost to Ellroy. It made him feel like truly he had made it. He had, he had it soared above and excelled above the master. But there's one final kind of slightly lurid twist for what is an appropriately lurid episode of Ellroy Reads. I'm filming at night. This is the X-rated Ellroy Reads edition, only for you, dear viewer. When I was writing Love Me First in Danger, The Life of James Ellroy, there was ongoing controversy over Philip Roth's biography. And James Ellroy was monitoring this very, very closely. Roth had kind of gone through a number of authorized biographers, and first it was Alfred Miller's nephew, it was several other people. They'd all parted ways. Roth had, claimed that he was in retirement. He'd tried not writing for 2 years. He'd finally lost that fanaticism to write. He apparently put a post-it note on his computer saying the struggle with writing is over. He'd managed to get to the stage where he didn't need to write anymore as an octogenarian. And he was going to spend his dotage just rereading some old favourites. But he was actually very energetically pouring all of his efforts into getting this authorised biography out there. And by all accounts, he saw it as a means to settle scores. He finally settled on the biographer Blake Bailey, who seemed like a good choice. He had a good track record. His biography of John Cheever, who Roth knew, was very, very well received. But essentially, Bailey and Roth also, kind of came to blows with a very, very different sense of the direction of what the biography should take. Roth passes away. Bailey's worried can he complete the project because he knows there's going to be now a battle between Roth's literary estate, which was being handled by an ex-lover of his, and also Roth's agent, who's also James Ellroy's agent. Anyway, Bailey gets the book done. It comes out to very mixed, divisive reviews. Many people felt that, especially in the age of Me Too, that Bailey was far, far too soft on Philip Roth with regards to the constant womanizing, the affairs, the misogyny. Let's call a spade a spade. It was, chauvinism and misogyny. Then it comes out that women make allegations against Blake Bailey, the biographer. So the controversy goes from subject to biographer. Women who'd been taught by Blake Bailey at university were saying that accusing him of sexual assault. The book, its original publisher pulps it. It gets published by Skyhorse Publishers, who are renowned for putting out books. They've got this kind of anti-cancel culture ethos. So they put out the books that nobody else will put out. So, it's just an ongoing dilemma. And let me tell you that Ellroy was watching all this very, very closely. And he was often grilling me as to what I thought about it. Now, I didn't see how it pertained so directly to the book I was writing. Partly because I thought Ellroy and Roth was so different. Yes, Ellroy was a ladies' man. He was twice divorced and he'd had lots of affairs. But the women I talked to never accused Ellroy of misogyny. He never raised his hand to one of them. He was a heartbreaker, sure. And yeah, he'd been a bit of a cad once or twice, or maybe more than that. But I didn't feel there was any kind of moral equivalence there. But Ellroy was watching it very, very closely. And although he was kind of disturbed at first at the speed at which Blake Bailey was cancelled, at first he was telling me, why isn't any of this in court? Why is he being cancelled in a public forum where he felt like Bailey didn't have a chance to defend himself? Eventually he came round to it. When he looked more deeply into the allegations, he came round to it. And eventually he's kind of like, well, after reading Philip Roth's biography, I'm not a fan of Philip Roth anymore. And I'm not a fan of Blake Bailey anymore either. So it was all a big soap opera that was playing out against the backdrop of the reading of my book. But so, I think it's an issue these days. Is the behavior of artists, is it going to affect whether they're painters, musicians, actors, writers, whatever they do? Is it going to affect your reading of their work? And yes, it did for me. Now we have trigger warnings or sensitivity warnings, and a lot of the attitudes towards women in here rankled. Some of it was still brilliantly funny, but some of it, less so. I think when Roth is essentially sending Portnoy up, who is essentially setting himself up, and you know, a lot of that Jewish humor. Although, to be fair, this is not just controversial today. It was controversial at the time. Roth was accused of being accused of self-hatred as an American Jew for many of the issues here. Although apparently a lot of the monologues were kind of inspired by Lenny Bruce and his kind of stand-up shtick. My only thing to wrap up, I would say, you know, judge for yourself. I know that kind of keeps the book alive because people buy copies or whatever, they keep talking about it. But, you know, the book isn't going to go away. It is an episode of American literary history. I think we still can go back and read it and judge for ourselves. And who knows, it might be like a key text for you. Okay, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next week for another episode of Ellroy Reads. Bye-bye.